Jalen Mills was in full uniform, badge shining, doing his job, but to two white officers, he was just a suspicious black guy. They cuffed him on the spot in front of a crowd under a storm of camera phones and rising rage. E.W. Mack. Then came one phone call, one name, one power move that ended their careers in minutes. Don't blink. You're about to witness justice, stripped raw and unfiltered. Officer Jalen Mills was on his routine patrol in the heart of the city, where every street corner told a story of struggle and survival. As a decorated black police officer, Jalen wore his badge as both a mark of duty and a symbol of battles fought not just in the streets, but in the hearts of those he swore to protect. On this particular day, the sun glared down as he walked past Barrio Market, a local hub in a neighborhood rife with tension and unspoken divide. But in America today, even a uniform isn't always a refuge. Race can cast a shadow over merit, turning honor into suspicion. In this moment, Jalen was not seen as a colleague or a protector. He was just another black man in a place purportedly wrong for him. The sound of muffled whispers cut through the usual noise of urban life. Two white officers, their patrol car parked at the curbside, eyeballed him through narrowed lids that spelled trouble. "Hey, you!" shouted the shorter one, his tone layered with authority and assumption. He approached Jalen with a swagger that could only be born from years of imposed power unchecked. The other followed, silently supporting his partner's antagonism, a silent echo of compliance. "Got ID?" the officer asked, ignoring the glint of Jalen's badge which caught the sun as he turned. They saw only a threat, Jalen thought, keeping his voice level, civil though the word twisted like acid behind his teeth as he responded. "Officer Jalen Mills, badge number 4392, precinct 27. Scoffing, they demanded his identification, their eyes blind to the truth, as if prestige and honor could ever be concealed in his ID card. In that moment, the static crackle of their radios seemed like the only barrier between reason and chaos. What they didn't know was Jalen's shield wasn't bartered easily. It was a testament to integrity he carried from war zones abroad to civilian streets. Behind those questioning eyes and beneath that mistrusted skin was the story of a soldier, a friend, with bonds etched in trust and valor. As the officers remained unconvinced, one of them reached forward, the cold metal of handcuffs thrusting a new reality into play. Around them, the neighborhood came alive with murmurs and disbelief, camera phones rising like an army of digital witness bearers. Will this time be different? Jalen wondered, eyes fixed defiantly on his counterparts as the cuffs clicked shut with little regard for justice or camaraderie. Detective Jalen Mills, yet another voice, poised to be silenced unless his unseen allies found a way through. Perhaps today was the day history would yield to a louder truth, to a call that transcended the ordinary, echoing back with justice once denied, but not forgotten. Comment where you're watching from and how justice is viewed in your community, Jalen's voice seemed to say, not only to those physically present, but to audiences streaming endlessly from afar. With this scene set, the stage was prepared for a conflict not just against the weight of unfounded prejudice, but against systems that allowed eyes to see only black and white, missing the shades of dignity and honor that define true justice. The air crackled with tension as the two white officers, still unconvinced by Jalen's credentials, tightened their grip on authority. Their faces were chiseled into smirks of disbelief, wearing looks that whispered, "What are you really doing here?" The handcuffs already fastened on Jalen's wrists were not just a restraint, but an indictment, an unjust sentence passed without trial or jury. In the eyes of these officers, Jalen's uniform seemed invisible. His well-earned rank, marked by countless nights on patrol and commendable service, vanished under the shadow of his skin color. As the handcuffs clinked against the small bones in his wrists, Jalen felt more like a suspect than an enforcer of peace. The irony here was not lost on him, but it did little to quell the frustration simmering beneath his composure. Other officers would greet each other with nods of recognition and respect, a silent acknowledgement of shared duty and mutual understanding. But for Jalen, These were buttons left unpressed. His presence rather provoked scrutiny and raised barriers that his badge alone couldn't dismantle. Doubt replaced dialogue, and every step he took was one against the tide of prejudiced perceptions. "What's this about? Is this what we're doing now?" Jalen's voice cut through the heavy air like a knife as he kept his gaze steady, refusing to flinch under the cold stares. His badge gleamed under the too bright sun, yet its authority seemed to dissolve under their gaze, like water slipping through clenched fists. The taller officer, with the steely demeanor of someone well-versed in the art of intimidation, stepped closer. "We're questioning suspicious activity," he said, each word articulated with a calculated weight meant to assert dominance. Jalen's pulse quickened, the beat a rhythmic reminder of the silent injustices he had faced and continued to witness every day. Suspicious activity? Here? In his own neighborhood? In front of his own precinct? The misunderstanding was not just a matter of mistaken identity. It was a systemic refusal to acknowledge his role, his efforts, his humanity. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" the officer continued, the edge in his voice cutting deeper than the words themselves. A small crowd began to gather, sensing the spark of injustice in the air, like an early whisper of an oncoming storm. Murmurs turned into comments, and soon phones were lifted, capturing every frame of discord for posterity, for scrutiny, for judgment. In a society where recording spoke louder than voices, these lenses offered a semblance of accountability, one Jalen hoped might serve as his silent ally. But here in this moment, surrounded by a sea of familiar faces cast in an unfamiliar light, his world felt both vast and confining. The officers didn't see a colleague, they saw an anomaly, a challenge to their domain. What they failed to recognize were the lines already drawn, tracing back through generations of voices unheard and truths unwritten. "This is my post. I patrol here every day," Jalen said, his voice steady even as his restraint was tested. He wasn't pleading, he was commanding, demanding acknowledgement of his reality amid a flux of denial. Still, all they saw was skin and suspicion. But for Jalen, this wasn't the first standoff against ignorance and fear, nor would it be the last. His resolve was fueled by moments like these, echoes of a lifetime replete with struggle and resilience. He felt the familiar burn of history pushing him forward through the shackles of the past, and in silence, like a whisper against the harsh roar of misunderstanding, he held on to the certainty that the truth was steady and unyielding, because what they didn't know was the history embedded in his stride, the stories lined in his expression, and the network of allies just a call away, ready to stand with him against injustice and everywhere in between. The atmosphere thickened, charged with an electricity that hovered somewhere between anticipation and dread. Jalen, standing resolute despite the heavy cuffs, cast his eyes around the gathering crowd. Watching and waiting, they became a chorus of witnesses to a play often seen, less often questioned. His heart beat in a steady rhythm as he maneuvered mentally through the legal quagmire forced upon him by the two hostile officers. The shorter of the two, Officer Daniels, stepped forward, face a tight mask of authority as he decided to press the confrontation further. "You sure you're telling us everything, Officer Mills?" His sneer carried an implication deeper than the question itself, digging at unspoken biases that laid the groundwork for this standoff. Handcuffed but refusing to appear helpless, Jalen's patience wore thin against the abrasive suspicion. It was not the first time he'd wrestled with the dualities of his identity, Sasette being a protector and being perceived as a threat. His words sliced through the air, sharp with exasperation. "All you see is what you want to see, Daniels. Maybe start seeing things for what they really are. We're following protocol," Daniels shot back, his voice dismissively cool, but underneath that control was a flicker of doubt, one that the encroaching crowd was quick to catch. The murmurs turned into distinct voices, some questioning, others voicing approval to this confrontation they had only imagined in whispered fears. The taller officer, Carter, stepped in, sensing their narrative slipping from control. The indignation simmering among the throng began to crack the veneer of their command. "Enough of this," he barked, reaching for his radio to call for backup. The motion was a misstep, a panicked attempt to shore up their manufactured authority before it was swept away entirely. But justice takes note of everything, waiting for moments when its scales might tip favorably for those wronged. At that instant, amidst the rising chaos, the unmistakable sound of an incoming call echoed from Jalen's jacket pocket, his communication lifeline, an unimpeachable connection to an unseen ally. Maria Santiago, Jalen's partner, entered the scene. Her arrival was timely, ensuring whatever embers of doubt lingered had fuel to ignite into decisive action. Her voice was steady, yet carried the force of those who stood at the front line against unreason. "Hey, that's enough," she commanded, a fierce energy in her eyes correlating every silent scream for fairness around her. But her presence seemed like a mere ripple against their steadfast stone. "Backup is on its way," Carter announced, his gaze slipping, if only briefly, towards Maria, a silent acknowledgement of her standing despite the gulfs of division present. Maria locked eyes with Jalen. "You got this, partner?" Her voice was both a question and a promise, a reassurance that they were in this together, united beyond mere protocols dictating cuff and command. Jalen nodded slightly, his resolve unshaken by the physical steel that bound his hands. The call was still active, quiet but palpable assurance that beyond this street voices were gathering, preparing to challenge the very foundations of this unjust tableau. The scene was charged with an urgency that defied time, a synchronicity of injustice meeting resistance. And in this moment, that phone call hummed with the promise of intervention. Would it be enough to end this theater of doubt, to dismantle the prejudice scaffolding around them? For every injustice captured within the confines of those handcuffs, every unwarranted detainment had sparked something larger. This wasn't just about him. It was about every voice muffled under the weight of wrongful assumptions, about every soul rallying behind the idea that justice wasn't just an ideal, but a living force. As the realization began to settle, as the officer's alpha dominance faltered ever so slightly with the specter of reinforcements in transit, Jalen welcomed the change carried within that single, significant phone call, a testament that echoed amidst the urban clash of right aligned with wrong. "We've got your back." In the distance, the sirens began to wail, their calls a harbinger of something Jalen could only hope would turn this absurdity into the cornerstone upon which justice could be solidly built. This was the ill-fated dance of skepticism meeting an unyielding truth, awaiting the confrontation which would, eventually, demand a reckoning. The sound of the clicking handcuffs was both physically restrictive and emotionally galling, a cold, metallic reminder of systemic prejudice. Around him the crowd grew denser, their faces etched with a varied mix of disbelief, outrage, and a haunting familiarity with the scene unfolding before them. Jalen stood still, his composure ironclad despite the fire building beneath his serene exterior. "Haven't we seen enough of this?" A voice called out from the throng, breaking through the quietly building tension. The words lingered in the air, an echo of the unvoiced thoughts percolating within each witness. Camera phones were hoisted aloft, a silent testament to communal resistance, each lens capturing the unfolding injustice, irrefutable, unforgiving, and broadcast live to dozens hooked into social media's immediate web. Officer Daniels and Officer Carter, the architects of this untenable standoff, felt increasingly alien in their roles, their sense of control waning under the weight of public scrutiny. They were not simply dealing with one man. They were facing an entire community, poised to carry this story to the far corners of the digital world. Jalen's stand was not just his own. It reverberated through every smartphone, resonated in every heart that beat for different outcomes, for transformed conversations. "Keep calm, folks. This is just protocol," Daniels called out, trying to infuse his words with authority, yet, to the gathered, his attempts sounded more like hollow affirmations, clutching onto threads of an invalid rationale. In those words lay both the manipulation and inevitability of the scenario, something Jalen perceived all too clearly. As the backup sirens crescendoed in the distance, Maria Santiago, with her badge visible and her presence resolute, took a stand closer to Jalen. Her dismay at the scene was palpable, and she locked eyes with him as if transmitting a vow of solidarity without uttering a single word. Their mutual understanding, born of countless shared experiences, threaded a silent tapestry of resistance that even the law-enforced fence could not sever. The officers, surrounded by an atmosphere that fluctuated between quiet dissent and vocal condemnation, continued their facade of law enforcement. But underneath their authoritative bravado, doubt crept in, a silent intruder siding with truth against the injustice they were swiftly growing embroiled in. Jalen, handcuffed but sturdy, matched Officer Daniels' gaze with an unwavering stare. His silence was deliberate, a weapon crafted from years of endurance in an arena rigged against him and countless others who resembled him superficially, yet shared a deeper, historical burden of being misunderstood and misjudged. His silence shouted louder than any protest rally cry ever could. Around them, the crowd shifted, murmuring fervent demands for justification. "While him?" asked one onlooker, a mother clutching her child close, her tone ripe with a complex mix of anger and exasperation. Her words bled a simple truth to power. The community saw in Jalen a reflection of their daily struggles and dignities undermined, a mirror image of the undercurrents they navigated with caution, day after day. Amid this tableau of human emotion and resistance came a blurring rush as city patrol cars joined the scene, their lights painting the street an urgent red and blue. Maria moved closer to those arriving, her voice calm yet commanding as she presented the situation succinctly, an inescapable truth born of clarity and fact. Through the cacophony of sirens and sustained public gaze, Daniels's facade crumbled slightly. The hint of something, a nervous flick of the eyes, a tremor in his voice suggesting recognition of their overstep. "Let's step back, reassess this whole thing," Carter mumbled, his earlier bravado now sounding feeble as it clashed with the wrongly cast roles they assumed. Jalen stood motionless, still bound by the cuffs, sure in his patience, steeled by experience. A sentinel amidst chaos, his quiet resilience speaking volumes. He knew this moment, captured surreptitiously in thousands of pixels, transcended his personal ordeal. It galvanized more than just local spectators. It stirred an entire movement poised for justice that transcended their immediate location, a new chapter writing itself against the narrative of old oppressions. In this melee of disorder birthed from long-standing biases, something profound pulsated into existence, the essence of unity against the forces still ignorant of their own ancient fallacies. This was not merely the intersection of his own story with history, but the catalyst igniting a greater transformation, with consequences far beyond the confines of this day. For in every flash of the camera, in every captured second, lay the evidence that vigilance, patience, and an unwavering soul like Jalen's could, indeed, lay the groundwork for change. Maria stood as a bastion of reason amidst the flurry of flashing lights and acrid tension. Her presence was not merely symbolic. It was the promise of order and calm in the face of escalating chaos. Her badge was worn with pride, reflecting Jalen's own ethos, a shared conviction that justice was a birthright, not a privilege to be fought for relentlessly. The very sight of her arriving transformed the atmosphere. The patrolling officers recognized her authority, yet there was still a gap of unspoken disbelief and division entrenched in their disposition. As Maria approached Jalen, careful not to provoke further instability, her voice firm yet soothing, carried over the low hum of gathering anxiety. "I'm here, Jalen. We'll get this sorted." The air around them braced, the faintest hint of relief evident in the crowd who had invested emotionally in the scene before them. With her on the field, allies found a collective voice, the solidarity of truth spoken through the presence of one resolute individual battling as hard as Jalen was bound. Her eyes locked with Daniels and Carter's, not with hostility but with clarity, a gaze that spoke volumes about restoring order and preserving justice, seeking understanding rather than asserting needless dominance. Here was someone ready to bridge the festering chasm between protocol and prejudice. Ignoring their formal indifference, Maria faced them with none of the timidity they might have expected. "Gentlemen, this is Officer Mills. He's on our side. Let's thoroughly assess why this scene exists before we proceed." Her words, measured yet authoritative, began untangling the knots of assumptions twisted into the officer's approach. Yet Daniels' posture remained stiff, his expression betraying both a reluctance to admit fault and the dawning awareness that their actions had painted them into a corner, against the vibrant backdrop of public perception racing ever onward. "It's about maintaining order," Daniels repeated, a mantra now frayed at the seams. He seemed to be trying to convince himself as much as Maria or the encroaching crowd filming this textbook narrative of power imbalance. "That's becoming less convincing by the minute," Maria shot back, edge underlined in her words, shaped by history still echoing loudly in her veins. There was truth to her defiance, born of experience and familiarity with these stormy crossroads, political and personal, the likes of which they had all weathered. Nearby, Jalen remained motionless, but Maria knew with a single glance as they exchanged a look that he was ready for the action, still caught between the ticks of time threatening partial closure. His patience was a rock bed, unwavering beneath the tempest of misguided accusations and authority clumsily applied. As backup arrived, real authority began to stabilize the scene, their own awareness already informed by the outcry spreading virally beyond the city's borders. Word came through, announced over squawking radios that stood out against the softer soundscape of reasoning, now running edges against the conflict. People elsewhere were demanding clarity, were ready, poised to unsheath the truth in more definitive ways than even this power struggle on the streets could fully address. And there, in the midst of this electricity of change, Maria heard the voice on Jalen's active call, the ally who was always ready to spring into action if needed. The reassurance in the tone tingled across the connection, a quiet lifeline enabling the very patience Jalen had wielded. Maria addressed the lead patrol officer that had arrived, before even the scrutiny-shackled Daniels could completely voice his challenge. "This misunderstanding doesn't have to escalate further. Officer Mills is here by protocol. We should all follow it accordingly." Neither like Daniels nor with the surface aloofness of Carter, the newly arrived officer nodded, understanding what needed to be done. A swift but practiced wave and the handcuffs were unlocked, releasing Jalen back into his rightful role as both colleague and protector. The crowd reacted visibly. Some cheered silently, others recorded the reversal, for the continuity of narratives untold, except in hearts and eyes made wide and seeing. And in this unfolding tableau of what some intended as deterrent, but had been drawn into light as affirmation, Jalen and Maria stood, unwavering conduits, both law enforcers and champions of a justice grounded not just in symbolism, but in transformative acts, heralding new dawns. They illustrated the realignment of unity, the different potentials humanity possessed when seeing past colors and badges to the shared dignity of souls amidst uniform struggles. As the blue and red of patrol lights still danced around them, their presence looked less like crisis and more like new chapters compelled to correct rather than antagonize, echoing through time and waves of digital engagements across a society poised finally to view things through clearer narratives. The call had been answered, but in calling, something unbreakable was now set into motion. Gashions and truths, tempered by unity, that forced a reckoning and a choice between tradition and the justice that demanded to breathe anew. The handcuffs released with a soft clink, a seemingly insignificant sound, but one that reverberated through the souls gathered around. A chorus of silent agreement among the spectators. There was a collective shift in the air, an exhalation of tension, relieved, but not quelled. Jalen rolled his shoulders as if casting off the invisible weight that had chained him more surely than those cuffs ever could. Around him, the gathering crowd, arms still outstretched with phones like banners of truth, began to realize that they were part of something larger than this moment, an evolving dialogue that echoed through screens and into living rooms far beyond this city block. But the detaining officer's acknowledgement of their misstep was muted and reluctant. Daniels and Carter stood slightly huddled, their postures defensive, no longer vehicles of authority, but subjects to a different kind of surveillance, one that chronicled their actions against a swiftly changing social narrative. Daniel seemed to shrink in this new light, his eyes unable to meet Jalen's steady gaze. Maria's presence, calm and resolute, remained an anchoring force within the chaotic medley of onlookers and officers. She turned to Jalen, offering a silent nod, a gesture that spoke of understanding conveyed without pomp or preamble. The solidarity between them was a palpable current, the kind forged in fires only known to those who uncompromisingly defend justice, even when bewildered by the ugliness of systemic prejudices. "Looks like you've made a few friends out here, Officer Mills," Maria remarked lightly, her voice steady against the aftermath of conflict. There was a trace of relief, tinged with the weight of an ordeal narrowly averted. Jalen chuckled softly, the sound carrying the fatigue of fighting battles, expected yet undesired. "Guess I finally went viral," he replied, shaking his head with a shade of wry humor, his voice reclaiming the agency momentarily stolen away in uncertainty and judgment. Around them, the officers called in for backup were dispersing, the scenario de-escalated and understood, if not fully resolved. This encounter was already rippling outward, documented by those whose fingers danced across their screens, sending signals and stories that interlaced with broader movements for change. It was no longer confined to the immediacy of this place. It was becoming part of a conversation far-reaching and insistent in its demands. Officer Carter shuffled uneasily, a relic of resolve, now regretting the ignorance marred by his earlier conduct. He cleared his throat and managed a less assured apology. "Didn't mean for things to get out of hand. Just trying to, keep order. You know how it is." Jalen held his gaze briefly, reading in that glance a gamut of emotions warring within Carter. A dance of regret, realization, and perhaps softly dawning awareness. Carter was learning, albeit the hard way, that the essence of policing was not found in unyielding doctrines but in the nuanced embrace of shared humanity. "Order doesn't always mean control," Jalen replied, his voice quiet but firm, a truth delivered with the gravity of experience. "Sometimes it's about understanding." The crowd, smaller now, but no less attentive, absorbed the exchange. Gaze followed action, and a sense of quiet victory settled like an unexpected rain that nourished rather than drowned. It was a moment both historical and painfully routine, a microcosm of a larger struggle to redefine justice in ways more visceral than any courtroom or debate hall could capture. Now, the atmosphere seemed to thrum with a burgeoning sense of potential. Conversations that had started in whispers would now roar across timelines and platforms, sparking new discussions, fueling the call for reform that demanded accountability, not just from those in blue, but from everyone who believed in rules forged in fairness. "Thanks for having my back," Jalen said, his voice cutting through to Maria with gratitude evident, unblemished by the ordeal. This wasn't just a survival of the day, it was a reclamation of narrative, one owned and shared with those willing to stand beside him, not just behind. And so the crowd slowly began to disperse, remnants of their involvement captured digitally, conversations spilling from street corners to cafes and online forums beyond this block. Together, they left a reminder that truth was often uncomfortable, but comfort had never been the goal. It was justice illuminated in this simple, starkly captured encounter, urging transformation with each replayed pixel. As Jalen and Maria walked side by side, the siren sounds now fading into the distance, they left behind a lingering question hanging in the air. How many silent voices would find courage in their stand, calling forth the justice that awaited a world ready to listen and transform? Back at the precinct, the atmosphere was thick with a tension that lingered like a stubborn fog, refusing to dissipate even in the face of the afternoon sun streaming through the rooftop windows. Jalen and Maria made their way inside, the gaze of fellow officers following them like a silent jury, some openly curious, others veiled in unreadable expressions, as the story of their ordeal spread faster than a wildfire. As they approached their desks, Jalen's thoughts gravitated towards the one lifeline, the phone call that had cut through the injustice like a knife, redirecting their course away from the explosive edge of confrontation. With a practiced flick of his thumb, he scrolled through his contacts and dialed the number of the ally. Came the voice on the other end, smooth, composed, a tone seasoned with the weight of years navigating the corridors of power. Daniel Reeves, a former Marine and now a prominent civil rights lawyer with a reputation for dismantling systemic barriers, was someone Jalen knew from his days in uniform, where every badge carried more layers than one could count. "Daniel," Jalen replied, a simple acknowledgement weighted with gratitude unspoken but deeply felt. "I owe you one." Again, Daniel chuckled softly, a sound that crackled warmly through the receiver. "Just returning the favor, brother. You did the hard part, standing your ground." The words carried an implicit understanding, too deep for mere dialogue to express. There was a pause, one that held the silence suggesting 1,000 unasked questions. Jalen let out a sigh, running a hand through his hair as he tried to process the whirlwind of the day's events. "How'd you manage to turn it around so fast?" Jalen asked, genuine curiosity tinging his voice. The kind of networking that moved mountains in minutes was a power few wielded effectively. "Influence breeds influence," Daniel replied soberly. "Once you know how the system operates, you can often turn it against those who abuse it. But you'll need more than just connections next time. Planned actions, visible change, and allies in the right places." Jalen nodded, his mind already ticking through the implications. "This isn't just a one-time fix, is it? How do we make it last? Beyond the optics." "Well, bringing in real reform isn't easy," Daniel answered, his voice tempered with conviction. "But thanks to everyone's phones and today's conversations out there, this incident's become a rallying cry. It sets the stage for more concrete actions, systemic reviews, and, hopefully, genuine change." As the conversation stretched, dipping and rising with the gravity of aspirations burdened by the hard truth, Jalen noticed Maria observing him from across their shared workspace. Her expression was one of encouragement, tempered by shared goals and mutual respect. "Stay sharp, Jalen," Daniel continued, a thread of steel running through his words. "We're at the beginning of something bigger. Keep the momentum going, one step at a time. You've got allies where it matters." Clicking the phone closed, Jalen leaned back, his soul slightly buoyed beyond fatigue, carrying forward with a wider perspective. The precinct now buzzed with routine activities. Officers moving back into patterned roles, oblivious to the undercurrents threatening to change the paths they so securely walked. He glanced at Maria, his partner in countless ways beyond the superficial. "Looks like we are far from done," he said, a shadow of wariness but also determination lacing his tone. "Change was never supposed to be easy," Maria replied, her smile weary yet unyielding, an unspoken promise to continue challenging the status quo, making the units to come forward with updated paradigms and selfless service, rather than rigid adherence to outdated norms. Stepping over to join Jalen, Maria felt the shared awareness that their day's work was a mere chapter in a larger narrative. The precinct, with all its contradictions, carried the pulse of an evolving story, one whose protagonists demanded that every act of bravery or defiance hammered into history, a step worth recording, one small victory at a time. Together they drew from a wellspring of hope unshaken by the day's ordeal, their resolve setting the stage for a new kind of enforcement, one tethered to esteem for community, truth, and the rewriting of justice echoing from today's streets, their stories cast in steadfast beams of a future pressing ever onward. As Jalen sat back at his cluttered desk, amidst stacks of unsorted paperwork and case files, his mind drifted back to simpler times, when the uniform they wore seemed an unambiguous herald of justice, when camaraderie blurred lines between himself and his colleagues, rendering their ranks a seamless tapestry of shared purpose. He recalled those early days vividly. The academy had been an equalizer, where backgrounds were momentarily dismissed in favor of potential and dedication. They'd worn matching uniforms, shared the grueling regiment, and endured the relentless drills, brothers and sisters under one creed. In those days, differences seemed as trivial as the styrofoam cups of lukewarm coffee they clutched, during stolen moments of respite. Jalen remembered the long nights spent around crackling bonfires, with Daniel and a few others from their squad. Those flames had danced and flickered against the dark backdrop of night, much like their ambitions leaped against the ornate structures of inequality they had sworn to dismantle. There was laughter then, infectious, unburdened laughter, and a kinship forged in aspirations worn proudly upon their sleeves. "What happened to us, Daniel? We promised to change the world," he had once mused aloud while flicking ashes into the fire. "We still can," Daniel had replied with a grin, his silhouette cutting a figure of quiet determination against the fiery glow. "We just need to stick to it, brother." But how easily ambition was dimmed by the mundane grind of systemic gears. Their once focused intent seemed to wane as life took its toll, leaving fractures in ideals and exposing voids for the world's inequities to seep through like bitter rain. Bade slowly watched camaraderie fade beneath the weight of cynicism, overtaken by disillusionment, solidified by real-world complexity. Back in the precinct, Jalen was snapped back to the present by the rattle of keys on the linoleum, followed by the familiar voice of Sergeant Thompson, whose jaded authority seemed to permeate the air. "Mills, got a moment?" "Sure, Sarge," Jalen answered, masking his contemplations with the ease of practiced composure. As Thompson walked over, his footsteps measuring authority and the kind of grizzled respect that came with years at the service. "Word is you handled things pretty smoothly today," Thompson observed, his eyes reflecting an older, experienced soul, weathered by history, both personal and professional. "Back in my day, what happened out there might have ended differently." Jalen met Thompson's gaze, reading between the lines of acknowledgement and regret lodged in the officer's wrinkled brow. The old sergeant, once a hardened skeptic of progressive change, carried the badge not as a burden, but as a learned mantle of duty, irrevocably shaped by the checks and balances of an era he knew was soon to pass. "It's a different time, Sarge," Jalen replied, choosing his words with the care of a craftsman stitching new hope from old cloth. "The world's watching now, and accountability looks more like action on our part than it ever did." Thompson nodded slowly before setting his coffee mug down with consideration. "Just keep your eyes open, Mills. It's a long road with too many turns. Just make sure you stay on it." Jalen watched as Thompson moved away, encapsulating the unspoken sentiment of mutual understanding, one that often transcended stated intention. The sergeant was not an ally in the passionate sense, but he wielded a pragmatic respect for those keeping the wheels spinning in a direction aligned more with societal improvements than mere maintenance of outdated orders. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, casting elongated shadows across the precinct floor, Jalen let his mind drift back to the vibrant days of relentless youth. He found solace there, but, more importantly, resolve. For the dreams once casually dreamt by firelight were now emboldened with the imperative of present necessity, urged by the world's gaze to fruition. There was a powerful humility in realizing that their journey was far from unique. It was but one step in a procession of collective endeavors echoing through halls of justice in progress, a mosaic of movements, where flaws and struggles bound a shared intention toward a greater good. Jalen resolved to reignite those flames of camaraderie stronger this time. Plans fanned by change, founded on adaptability, growing from past intentions better defined now, molded by experiences and valuable wisdom. This was not merely a hope for the future, but an assured confrontation with the present, a facing down of barriers once considered insurmountable by the unyielding strength of belief in something inherently, inevitably greater. As the precinct bustled around him, Jalen felt within him a resounding call, a promise, whispered among the hills and fires of yore, now amplified through the unyielding march of courage meeting its chosen moment. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the precinct was left awash in shadow and neon, bathed in the glow of computer screens and the soft chatter of radio static. For many, the day ended here, the monotony of paperwork enveloping them in a familiar shroud. But outside, a different kind of crescendo rose, a public outcry, an unabated wave gaining momentum as it echoed through the streets, and spilled into the online ether. Jalen sat at his desk, the buzz of incoming notifications tingling in his pocket like a persistent nudge. Only hours ago, his detainment and the discord with the two officers had been merely an incident, a regrettable lapse in judgment. Now it was a digital wildfire, stoked by instantaneous sharing and relentless commentary flooding platforms across American screens. Ticking off occurrences from his phone, Jalen scrolled through an endless parade of posts, snapshots of his confrontation interspersed with hashtags of solidarity, calls to action peppered with demands for accountability. Justice for Jalen, end police bias. Stand with Jalen, each digital chant adding volume to a surging call for reform that resonated far beyond the day's events. Maria, seated a few desks away, synced alongside the hashtag cascade on her own device, marveled at the mobilization with an expression mingled with resignation and resolve. It's crazy how quickly it all goes global, she mused, catching Jalen's eye from across their shared precinct space. People are angry, and rightly so. Jalen nodded, absorbing the torrent of emotions projected onto the screens, a catharsis for some, a rallying cry for others. Feels different, doesn't it? He said, contemplating the creech forged from their confrontation. The virtual swell carried the potential of real influence, tethered uniquely to the raw evidence captured mere feet from where he now sat. We're not alone in this. Decades of amassed frustration seemed to pulse with every tweet. Every share prejudice, long embedded, now spotlighted under an incessant flow of digital awareness impossible to ignore or dismiss. The local news had picked up the story, further amplifying the burgeoning narrative interwoven with cries for empathy, for action, for change. But beneath the clamor, Jalen could sense a quieter, yet more profound realization taking hold. This moment, publicized and examined, was more than a fleeting outcry. It was groundwork for possibility. For every condemnation of the status quo, there lay an equal and undeniable opportunity to reshape the ethos of accountability, to craft new doctrines from the embers of discontent now kindling purpose into action. On screens across America, each image of his defiant stance and Maria's steadfast support painted a truth transcendent beyond boundary or jurisdiction, a shared mission for justice, not as an abstract ideal, but as a painstakingly realized, essential bridge to be carefully forged. Messages of support flooded in from across the states. Activists, allies, ordinary citizens hailing from neighborhoods far removed yet intimately familiar with injustice. Each message reading as a testimonial burned together into a singular declaration. We see you. We won't look away. Back at the precinct, the digital tide washed over the once unbroken policies of impunity. Discussions sparked into public forums, debates erupted within council chambers, civic leaders forced to acknowledge that what had been born from one street's narrative now demanded entry into wider dialogues on policing, equity, and reform. Amid the flood of notifications relentlessly streaming across his screen, Jalen found an unexpected ally, Gina Harmon, a young woman who appeared to know exactly what was at stake. A community leader from a nearby district, she reached out not with a simple expression of solidarity, but with a strategic proposition, infused eloquence, hinting at a vision already partially realized, an invitation to participate in an upcoming rally, organized not merely to address, but to propose actionable change. Her words read like a clarion call. A blueprint manifested through discontent transformed into renewal. They may not hear just one of us, but they will have to listen when we all stand together. Jalen's own response was unhesitating, a confirmation of attendance that he hoped would signal involvement, not just in the spectacle of public protest, but in the construction of solutions to stand at the heart of dialogue and enact true reform. For the world was watching, restless against the confines of centuries of unseen struggles, now seeing daylight with earnest finality, and what was once merely an incident a collection of actions within city confines, now echoed with questions throughout an interconnected digital consciousness. Could true change finally be woven from an empathically shared resolve? And in every retweet, every hashtag stitched into the fabric of evolving conversation, there was the faint beginning of an answer, waiting to reverberate its way across the stormy landscape they were summoned to traverse. The night was alive with the energy of change, pulsating with a rhythm that seemed to synchronize every heartbeat in the city. Jalen stepped out into the cool night air, feeling a sense of anticipation that had been absent for far too long. He was heading toward a clandestine meeting at an unexpected location, a small cafe nestled within the bustling downtown core, its nondescript entrance barely hinting at the significance of the conversation about to unfold within its walls. As he moved through the city streets, the echoes of earlier events reverberated in his mind. He was caught in a liminal space where past injustices met the promise of upcoming reforms. The vibrancy of online protests mirrored the strength of in-person gatherings that were organically forming even now, each voice ready to add its own note to the symphony of collective demand. Pushing through the cafe's door, Jalen was immediately enveloped by the warm, inviting ambiance. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with the soft chatter, creating an overlay of familiarity to what was about to be an important and strategic discussion. In an alcove toward the back, a tall figure stood and waved him over, a figure Jalen knew like the guiding star of a ship tossed in stormy seas. Daniel Reeves, the powerful ally whose phone call had shifted the dynamics on the street, greeted Jalen with a firm handshake. Together since their military days, Daniel had always been more than an ally. He was a brother in arms and a formidable agent of lawful upheaval. "Good to see you under less dramatic circumstances," Daniel quipped, a smile touching his lips that barely hinted at the steel resolve brewing beneath. "Feels like shifting sands beneath our feet," Jalen replied, taking a seat opposite Daniel. He leaned back, allowing the conversation to flow naturally from shared history, unworried of being overheard in the buzzing cafe hub. Joining them was Gina Harmon, the community leader whose message had laid the groundwork for a shared mission to rally tonight, a movement as much defined by strategic nuance as by raw emotion. Her intelligent gaze flitted between the two men, calculating and optimistic. "The rally is just a start," she began, her voice steady, poised, and filled with the gravity of purpose. "Every action from here on out needs to point toward systemic change. We're not just seeking a moment, but a movement." "Agreed," Daniel interjected, shifting slightly in his seat to include Jalen squarely in his line of sight. "From here, we build courage into policy. We collect stories, mobilize voters, pressure councils. We need reform, Jalen, and we need it now. Your incident has lit a fire, but if we don't maintain it, you know how things fade." Jalen finished for him. His voice carried the bitterness of a truth often repeated. "Today's outrage is tomorrow's forgotten hashtag. But maybe this time can be different." "Different," Gina echoed, an agreement palpable in her tone. "Next week's rally will serve as the cornerstone. We have a coalition of activists, voices prepared to offer real solutions rather than just speak grievances. We've set up a panel of legal experts, civil rights historians, community leaders. We'll draw light to this not as an isolated anomaly, but as part of a chronic pattern that demands correction." Listening intently, Jalen felt a surge of optimism course through him. For here, in this dimly lit cafe layered with the simple decadence of city night sounds, was the beginning of something tangible. A plan to amplify today's objections into lasting reform. Daniel leaned forward, locking eyes with Jalen, offering the sureness of one forged in past battles. "You've always been more than just one officer, Jalen. The shared experiences, the camaraderie we forged back then, it's the same fire fueling our fight for justice now. We need your voice. Because when we speak, the world knows it's not just one cry in the dark." Jalen nodded, understanding the mantle being passed, realizing the burden willing to be shared. "I'm in. All the way," he said, sealing their pact not in words, but with the sincerity of one choosing between silence and action, hope and complacency. As they continued to plan, sketching maps of dreams past and present, Jalen understood that the echoes of sirens would no longer signal alarm, but rather the call to gather voices united, not merely by shared grievances, but by an imperative future. Leaving the cafe later that night, Jalen felt the cool breeze wash over him like a promise, the city silent yet alive with potential and power. As shared glances punctuated their respective departures, Jalen knew that they were not leaving behind mere plans on a table, but a map to the inevitable challenges and resurrections yet to come. For with each step, the walk home was not merely a return, but a march onward into a horizon basking in the dawning light of purposeful. That morning, as the clock marked the onset of a new day, Jalen found himself driving to a place he never imagined he'd return to unravel rather than maintain, a meeting with his precinct's chief. The man who'd been a fixture of tradition, of old ways too familiar with resistance, now stood at the crossroads of progress and denial, tasked with addressing not just Jalen's engagement in justice, but the larger waves threatening his resistance. The city loomed outside as Jalen navigated its silent streets, each turn of the wheel, each shadow caught in passing headlights, a whisper of the discontent simmering just below the surface. The rally was days away, its promise stretching like a live wire through the heart of the community. But this moment demanded its own kind of courage, a confrontation with an entrenched system, symbolized by one man steadfast in tradition. Outside the precinct, Jalen paused momentarily. The building that had been his professional sanctuary felt different now, its familiarity both comforting and daunting as he readied himself for the duel disguised as a discourse awaiting him. Inside, the halls buzzed with muted activity. Fellow officers gave him nods or polite acknowledgments, but there was a new undercurrent, ripples of an awareness that something inevitable was drawing near, an evening of reckoning sparked by one phone call and culminating in hashtags that would not die in silence. As he approached the chief's office, a place always resonant with authority, yet now tainted by forthcoming admissions, Jalen steeled himself with each step. The moment he stepped through the threshold, he knew the conversation would ripple far beyond the confines of these walls. Chief Harrison looked up as Jalen entered, his visage imposing with years of experience etched into every line. A weathered fourth badge sat neatly on his desk, a token of merit encased in a glass frame, a relic from a system Jalen now aimed to rebuild, not just patch. "Officer Mills," Harrison greeted, his voice gruff but steady, an attempt to project assurance, tempered by the underpinnings of discord. "Take a seat," Jalen obliged, his posture neither aggressive nor complacent but indicative of resolution, the kind garnered through clarity and the dread of inaction deferred. The silence stretched thin between them, tempered only by the subtle humming of the air conditioning. In those heartbeats punctuated by nothing but soft breaths, an entire history seemed to unfold. Far beyond the confines of stone and policy, a legacy of injustice rearing toward resolution. "I've seen the news," Harrison began, raising an eyebrow with measured intensity, the weight of the entire institution in his gaze. "Things have escalated." "Chief, we're sitting on a time bomb," Jalen interjected, leaning forward subtly, the urgency coiling in his voice unsuited to the calmness of the room. "Things have reached a point where doing nothing is not an option anymore. We've got to acknowledge and act, or we doom every principle we've sworn to uphold." Harrison's lips tightened, lines of age deepening as he considered the implications. "What are you proposing?" The query, a brittle thread connecting them. "We're organizing a rally," Jalen replied, forthright with intention, the hidden linchpin behind what could cascade into more than ceremonial gestures of apology, an earnest appeal for understanding. "It's an opportunity to address these issues, not ignore them. Police bias, systemic reform, it's overdue." An emotion flickered behind Harrison's eyes. Irritation, perhaps, or understanding masked by attempts to present the omnipotent police facade, but there was an implicit acknowledgement nonetheless. "Change doesn't happen overnight, Mills," he said, though Jalen noted the crack in his conviction. Awareness crouched in the shadows of his resolve. "Your initiative sounds noble, but these processes are entrenched, not easily dislodged." Jalen nodded, not as an agreement, but as recognition of the challenge, reluctant to yield in a demand for systemic overturn that was both necessary and daunting. Change takes time, but inaction will only dig trenches deeper. Barriers, already insurmountable for many. "We're not immune, Chief. Our badge doesn't elicit trust by default anymore," Harrison sighed. A deep, almost resigned exhalation. The office was suddenly too small for the dream of justice clashing against old ingrained practices. "If the rally happens," he said, finally capitulating to presences larger than the confines of power, "ensure it reflects our intent to listen, not just speak. More than that," Jalen insisted, meeting Harrison's weary urge with hopeful resilience, bolstered by allies now rallying from cities wide. "We engage. You said change doesn't happen overnight. So let's at least start to ripple toward that point." As the conversation drew to a close, Jalen understood the moment crystallized not just future requirements but reframed an entire culture battling its shadow. Outside this office was a world poised, ready to echo acknowledgement of wrongs past, leaning into the dawn of something profoundly different. In the silence that followed Jalen's exit, the precinct itself seemed to hold its breath, pawing at the reverberation yet to demand engagement, proof that the courage to ask difficult questions might unfold into resolutions greater than any one man, one voice, or one silence overcome. Behind the grand colonial facade of City Hall, a different kind of storm was brewing. In contrast to its stately appearance, the building hummed with the urgent pulse of a city on the brink of transformation. The windows of the council chambers cast geometric shadows on the floor, as inside voices rose and fell, punctuating the tension rippling through the assembly. Jalen had been here numerous times before, but today he stood at the threshold of a conversation that felt like it was creeping, ever so relentlessly, toward a pivotal juncture. The corridors were alive with whispers, advisors, and aides shuffled past, carrying with them memos and resolutions that spoke of preparation for an unprecedented public response. As he entered the chambers, the assembled council members sat at a long, imposing table, each face a mixture of determined skepticism and political calculation. The space was imbued with both the fatigue of prolonged debate and the electrifying charge of pivotal decision-making. A coliseum where ideals and realities clashed with each statement, each rebuttal, each vote cast. Jalen took his seat among other invited community voices. Across the room, he recognized faces both familiar and notorious, city leaders, activists, even critics whose voices had once seemed impenetrably loud and whose opposition was now essential in forging consensus. Prominent among them sat Gina Harmon, ready to lead a critical charge in the meeting's agenda. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and in that moment there was a silent pact renewed. They were there to effect change, not merely witness dialogue. The meeting commenced under the chairmanship of Mayor Edelman, a figure caught between his polished veneer and the raw demands of his electorate. A soft rustle filled the air as each person adjusted their papers or prepared their devices for note-taking. The room settled as Mayor Edelman called the assembly to order. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady with discernment, yet the strain of leadership edged its way through. "We are gathered here to address the pressing issues our city currently faces concerning policing and community relations. Today's discussions will focus on our response and plans for systemic reform." Jalen listened, feeling the weight of the council's responsibility pressing in. There was an opportunity here, one that didn't come often, a chance to turn cries for justice into actionable language embedded in city policy. He felt the urgency matched by tension, a dance where each step warranted careful choreography. The first part of the agenda channeled the council's commitment, or lack thereof, and resolutions adopted to address grievances brought to light by recent events. The discourse touched on familiar points: training, accountability, oversight, a checklist of reforms often endorsed but rarely fulfilled. Then Gina stood, her stature both commanding and inspiring amid the uncertain terrain, ready to translate the digital cacophony into focused purpose. With all due respect, Mayor Edelman, and esteemed members of the council, Gina began, projecting her voice with clarity shaped by purpose. The time for lists is past. We must engage in actionable reform that reflects genuine commitment from all of us gathered here. She paused, the room's attention focused, as if breath collectively held in anticipation of the transformational fire she stoked. We need a formalized oversight committee, Gina continued, each word a stone laid on the foundation of necessary change, one empowered to conduct reviews and ensure community representation in policies affecting public safety. This is our opportunity to ingratiate trust that has so often been eroded. The proposal evoked murmurs, some of agreement, others a reflexive caution, wary of enstriving radical changes into tangible actions. Yet the air shimmered with the tentative promise of consensus, coaxed by realities and digitally archived truths no longer deniable. Jalen's inclusion among the spectators turned participants was vital, as they continued enunciating the value of empowered community input, a seat at the table for citizens typically estranged from such discourses. As they debated the feasibility of proposed changes, opposition raised familiar hurdles: funding, political will, the need to preserve certain structures. But a new narrative emerged beneath the volley of logistics, a shared understanding that this conversation would not yield as just another appeasement gesture. It demanded grounding by tangible strategy, marked by new policies rather than placating press releases. Jalen, absorbing his moment in the arena framed by towering domes and expectations, represented more than just a single outcome. Each sentence articulated by mentors and peers sharpened his resolve, emboldening a push against entrenched structures. He understood deeply that while minds here might voice doubt, hearts swayed by activism's commons could realign discourse, much like those witnessed from the city streets to virtual highways, intersecting lives across worlds unseen. By the meeting's end, they emerged with not just agendas and minutes to log, but a path paved, its surface marked by promise, a council seed dispersed into the soil of collective engagement. An intangible threshold transpired there, crossed not only by policy, but by trust, flickering to life within chambers that day, echoing promises vibrant where half-truths once lingered, ghostly in realms past. As Jalen left, following the others into daylight, brimming with renewed intention and responsibility, he was buoyed by the day's work. A new era beckoned, carved by steadfastness set upon the city devoted to difference. He marveled quietly at the audacity within their grasp that belonged boldly on the side of history longing to rewrite itself, with fingers stained in honest endeavor and the courage to dream enacted into every action pursued thereafter. The next day dawned clear and sharp, the air tinged with the subtle anticipation of a city on the cusp of change. In precincts and penthouses, in classrooms and corner stores, conversations swirled around the singular notion of justice, a justice that now, finally, seemed within reach. The community, once fragmented by divergences in vision and displacement of consequent voices, was converging with renewed purpose toward a rally that echoed far beyond its physical bounds. Jalen stood in the park's epicenter, a sprawling green haven inlaid with the walkways now thrumming underfoot with people streaming in from all corners of the city. The rally was a mosaic of humanity in motion. Faces of every shade and story gathered under a single banner of equality, each arriving with a heart full of hope and the drive to make their voices undeniably heard. Between the hands-clasping phone screens and banners, between chants that swelled and ebbed like an ocean, there was a string of unity threading through like light refracted into prisms of conviction and courage. Gina Harmon moved among the crowd, a lighthouse amid a sea of faces, her presence a galvanizing force that pulled people together in symphonic wonder and synergy. Her articulate discourse had sparked ambitions, now buoyed by the testimonies of many, moved to chart justice's course from imagination into indelible reality. "Thank you all for being here today," she shouted into the microphone from her perch on the stage, constructed amidst a backdrop of vibrant banners. Her voice carried with the authority of a leader both unexpected and wholly inevitable. "We're not just here to make noise, we're here to make change." The crowd responded with a resonating cheer, waves of sound crashing over the park's vast expanse. Families clustered together, side by side, with advocates brandishing signs that proclaimed a future less tainted by the shackles of past oppressions. Even those who had come only to observe were caught in the tide of engagement that couldn't be easily swept away. Jalen joined her on stage, feeling the pulse of the crowd extend to him, a sensation foreign and yet intimately familiar, propelling him to speak not as an officer but as a part of the very community he'd sworn to protect. "Today, we stand united," Jalen began, his voice clear and firm, echoing with the power of truths born with struggle and camaraderie. "We're here because we know what it's like to be unheard and unseen, to be silenced by systems designed to exclude. But not anymore. Today we raise our voices for accountability, for change that resonates through each link in this chain we are forging." The stage was a tapestry of voices woven deeply, aligning movements far from initial grievances into a unified call for conscious and compassionate reformation. "I see beyond this crowd," he continued, catching the eyes of those gathered, fixing upon them the hope he saw reflected back. "I see a path forward that extends beyond today's rally. This momentum doesn't end here. It's where we begin anew." From the edges of the throng, other leaders took to the stage, representing different areas of expertise, from activists detailing plans for community oversight committees to educators advocating for reforms within the school system. Each speech was met with a swell of encouragement that underscored their shared ambition, a symphony of intentions harmonizing within the heartbeat of collective endeavors. "Let us not just speak for change here today," Gina concluded as voices faded into hopeful murmurs. "Let us act. Join us in our panels, our discussions. Help us overhaul what has been stagnant for too long." The park thrummed with an electric tide of shared commitment, a bridge built from entangled histories, now purposefully undone and resolved anew, with an eye on equality, equity, empathy reigning ever mindful over time's unrelenting march. As the day continued, participants broke into smaller groups, planning their next steps, signing up for initiatives, and pledging to carry forward the dialogue they had all so fervently helped instigate. Jalen watched it all, knowing that the story would not fizzle under rhetorical gestures but grow brighter, galvanized by the determination ignited here. Before the evening light faded completely, casting shadows long and soft across the park, Gina approached Jalen, her pace carrying resolve undimmed. "We did it," she breathed, the words a testament to not just the event, but to the bond they now shared, built on trust, unified by justice. "Today, we did," Jalen agreed, feeling the circle complete as the day wound down amidst hopeful promises exchanged through handshakes and binding aspirations. "Tomorrow, we continue." And so the rally, a tapestry of unity and resistance, came to its end, with promises still glowing in the twilight, a shared commitment to each next step, each echoey yielding promise that would hold them together as they moved forward into dreams finally entwined in reality's bold embrace. In the aftermath of the rally, Jalen felt the quietude that often accompanies profound movements, the lull that asks one to reflect, recharge, and prepare for the next battle. The streets, now mostly empty, carried echoes of the day's spirited calls to action, a gentle reminder of the collective energy that had surged through the city, leaving behind a resolve that refused to fade. But amidst this newfound unity, an unsettling discovery filtered through the layers of resolve, casting shadows over the bright tapestry they had sewn together. Jalen was heading back to his station when his phone buzzed urgently, an insistent vibration that tethered him back to the countless invisible threads entangling his duties with ever-shadowy realities. The voice on the line was thin, tense. The caller, his fellow officer and informant inside the precinct, spoke quickly, like secretively warding off unwelcome eyes. "Jalen, you need to know," he began, his words heavy like stones thrown directly into the conscience. "There's something you may not be aware of. A warning circulated around. You were advised against working in these neighborhoods. It's not official, but it's practiced by some." Jalen's grip tightened on the wheel, his knuckles paling with the pressure of emotions rushing through. Confusion, anger, comprehension intertwined in a cacophony only the heart attempting to grasp betrayal could comprehend. The "these" was understood without further framing, a colloquial buffer as insidious as the structures they opposed. Racism did not shed its cloak easily, even under light newly poured, branding once comrades into mavericks of bias breeding and hidden corners and whispered exclusions. "I thought it was just rumors, but—" The voice hesitated on the other line, trailing off, caught between duty and personal ethos. "You have people who believe in another way, Jalen, but not everyone is ready for this change." As silence crackled down the line, fragments of conversations passed, shimmered ominously in Jalen's memory. Offhand comments dismissed as ignorance, warnings he had brushed past in favor of hopeful camaraderie, now magnified under betrayal's lens. With the rally's aftermath imprinted in heartstrings and broader battlefields expected, Jalen swallowed the bitter taste of reality entwined within victories earned, his code as a protector being quietly undermined by those he had thought stood beside him. Through gaps in unity, the stringent forces of bias still seeped, unyielding in brief moments like gossamer tendrils in the dark. "Thanks for telling me," Jalen managed, finally, though each word steeled him against an intricacy raw and sly. His informant's sigh, barely audible, yet laden with witnessing it, drew, expecting a burden now evenly shared. "Stay safe." As he hung up, his thoughts circled back to the rally, to each voice raised not in vain but as testament to truths shouted into air now perfumed with the scent of equal parts fear and exhilarating promise. When he reached the precinct, the weight of understanding settled, fingers familiar. Yet in the heart's brightly kindled cauldron, a strengthening fire persisted. For despite betrayal's gnawing puncture, resolve swore brighter render's root. Jalen stepped into a space that now felt both known and veiled. In introductions anew, the usual greetings hovered like veiled truths, coiled in recognized indifference, shadowed glances and painted smiles strained under forthcoming acknowledgement. But beneath his customary composure, beneath the passion darkened with understanding, Jalen channeled the idioms of resilience that had sustained not just him but countless souls before him, motions of understanding, bridging knowledge with reaching forward, his fear laying only with possible inaction, not ignorance, to this freshly unearthed arena. He shared story pieces with Maria in the corner of the precinct now, like other, the friend and partner whose courage walked parallel doorways. This discovery more guarded in loyal exchange. They steeled against what might be sharing space in the shadows they longed to dispel. Her eyes, the ones he'd confided his rotten awakening, met his own, and fused resolve wordlessly shared. Progress tempered their alloyed aspirations despite obstacles yet to bridge, and so, knowledge new found transformed into catalyst. The moment stretched infinitely into action, plotted through truth's transparent lens. Each step took meaning beyond policing action. It was to be justice made fairy tale finality, rendered into crystal clear lens. They had not seen the last of obstacles shadowed. Repentant or unyielding though they were, it would be cohesive passion rendered force, enough to compel justice's cause, a luminous truth. No room for shadows. The shadows of early evening had just begun to stretch across the precinct when Jalen received an anonymous message, an email whose contents broke through his fatigue with the force of revelation. The email was terse and direct, containing a single attachment, one that promised both vindication and further complexity. Opening it cautiously, Jalen found himself staring at a dossier, meticulously compiled, detailing a series of internal complaints and documented instances of racial bias and misconduct buried within the ranks. The sender remained shrouded in anonymity, yet their boldness and the detail of the dossier spoke of someone intimately acquainted with the precinct's operations and those quiet corners where such travesties festered. This evidence threatened to cascade through the force like a tsunami, sweeping away the facades of propriety that certain elements had maintained. Maria, seated nearby, noticed Jalen's intensity as he scanned the documents, her curiosity piqued by his sudden, absorbed silence. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she commented, her tone light but laced with concern. Unable to ignore the palpable shift in his demeanor, Jalen turned the screen toward her, letting the contents speak without the need for preface. As Maria reviewed the file, her expression transformed through phases of disbelief, anger, and finally a steely resolve. Jesus, Jalen, this is explosive," she whispered, her voice threading the boundaries of quiet outrage and anticipation. "I'm starting to feel like Pandora," Jalen replied dryly, though beneath the quip was an acknowledgement of the burden of truth they'd now Maria looked up, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that mirrored his own. "This whistleblower? They trust you, but how do you plan to use this? It's not just about us anymore. This has the power to unravel everything." Jalen nodded, the enormity of their next steps looming large. He paced the floor slowly, weighing the implications, the potential backlash that could follow such a staggering revelation. This was a narrative not yet fully formed, awaiting authors willing to transcribe both peril and promise. "Whoever sent this cares about the truth," Jalen said, more to himself than Maria, although she nodded in agreement. "And if their aim is to initiate real change, we have to handle this right. It can't just be a call-out. It has to be a call to action. We need to make sure this gets into the right hands," Maria added, her mind quickly piecing together the next logical steps. "We have to protect whoever brought this to light. This could cost someone their career, if not worse." There was an uneasy silence as the reality of their responsibility settled in. The precinct they viewed as home was now the center of a storm sparked by insidious realities harbored too long, where racism had bred unchecked, shielding those who believed in maintaining its destructive order. Jalen cast his gaze toward the window, where the city stretched out endlessly, full of people who would never know the machinations that dictated their everyday safety and order. The opportunity presented itself to air grievances, not to tear down structures entirely, but to rebuild them stronger under the sun's unyielding scrutiny. Their decision was clear. They needed allies, voices that could amplify this revelation without compromising the whistleblower's safety. There was clarity of purpose, their mission clear, as they talked about engaging the wider community, known advocates for social justice who had the platform and the resolve to navigate these turbulent waters. "We'll talk to Daniel first," Jalen suggested, his conviction well placed in the man who had stood with him through thicker battles, a figure symbolic of resolve that mirrored the legitimacy they needed. Maria agreed, understanding intimately the avenues they had to traverse to secure both truth and justice. It was crucial they balance urgency with deliberation, each step requiring careful negotiation through an increasingly complex landscape. As the precinct settled into its rhythmic hum of nighttime ordination, Jalen and Maria prepared their next move. With the deeply seated knowledge of what lay behind shadow-guarded doors, they bore witness to the system's potential unraveling, ready to wield the truth like a scalpel, cutting with precision through layers of denial. The revelation, buoyed in download form, rested securely in Maria's drive, the linchpin waiting to incite the change they now sought with buried truths highlighted. The PUVID headlights now turned fabric constellations to action, bound beyond borders, reset, hope reflected with hands raised. This wasn't an ending, but a beginning mapped against the twilit city, a step toward embracing the indefatigable challenge of justice forged and reforged on Newark's unforgiving streets, poised to illuminate the world beyond, with newfound allies fortifying every stride. The sun cast long shadows over City Hall the next morning, a monument standing quiet before the day's unfolding drama that lay cloaked in the delicate balance of justice and accountability. Jalen and Maria sat huddled in a corner office with Daniel Reeves, whose role was rapidly evolving from ally to confidant in the wake of the anonymous dossier. The gravity of the evidence weighed heavy upon them, a keystone poised to shift the foundations of entrenched systems. Daniel ran a hand over his jaw thoughtfully, glancing between the printed pages spread before him like a clandestine manuscript. "This is a minefield," he stated plainly, though his voice carried the undercurrent of steely resolve inherent to one familiar with navigating perilous ethical landscapes. "Too big for just one lawyer," Jalen acknowledged, refusing to set aside the enormity of their task. "We have to root out the rot, but ensure we're not jeopardizing careers of those caught in bureaucracy's crossfire." Maria nodded, threading her fingers together, her expression driven yet calm. "We need to coordinate with internal affairs," she suggested. "This can't be a simple takedown. It requires surgical precision, removing the cancer without destabilizing what still works." Daniel listened, absorbing their strategy. "The key lies in the evidence. If this dossier truly reflects systemic malpractice, it needs to accompany a call to restructure practices methods, methodology, aimed at healing. We need to engage voices within and beyond law enforcement who can guide the change." Their agreement formed quickly, spurred by shared goals, overhung with the immediacy of urgent transformation. The emailed warning they received was not merely a disclosure, it was the match to delicate tinder waiting to catch light, long overdue. "Internal affairs will likely resist at first," Daniel warned, pointing out the realities of institutional self-preservation, "but persistent light over the sequence of events will be our ally." They worked swiftly, mapping out the approach. They would get the anonymous information into the hands of a selected number of reporters, seasoned in handling sensitive materials and holding institutions accountable. Simultaneously, they'd organize a small, trusted group of officers and community leaders to present their findings officially to internal affairs. A two-pronged tactic ensuring the truth couldn't be buried deeper by those invested not in change, but in stasis. As they caught the world outside brightening from dawn into full embrace of morning, their concerted resolve deepened. They were about to pry open a vault holding secrets rusty with neglect, yet pulsing potent with potential revolution. This was not the first time they pursued justice branded by uncertainty, nor would it be the last. "Lining up the right channels under legal protection is vital," Jalen noted, his experience as an officer interwoven with the concerns of exposure. "We've already seen what happens when narratives spin out of control without grounding." Daniel's thoughtful expression shifted into one imbued with characteristic conviction. "You're both right. Parallel paths, careful execution. Only transparency will reinforce bridges between platforms of accountability and practical reform." They spent the next few hours compiling the information, defining procedures in pristine clarity, ensuring the whistleblower remained shielded, while truths became explicit. As Jalen cross-referenced the most significant entries in the dossier, his mind wandered briefly toward those officers resistant to reform, old colleagues whose voices and visions remained narrowly confined, and here, in the very heart of administrative prudence. Their intent aimed not at vindication but at genuine, lasting reform stood ready a purpose noble enough, inclusive enough, to transform resistance into understanding. By late afternoon, they had contacted the reporters, the advisors, arranged meetings and presentations with internal affairs, each step laid with calculative caution, designed to transcend mere headlines. As they emerged into the bustling city once more, the world carried on in rhythms that belied the imminent changes the precinct and perhaps the broader city was about to undergo. It felt almost surreal, knowing the impact they were bracing, but the strength of their resolve remained undetected, a subtle warmth beneath the surface of urban life. The path they tread would not yield under naive ideals. It required vigilance, empathy, and incorrigible dedication beyond simply doing the right thing. And with allies like Daniel, a protective embrace of community support, and a quiet courage informing their steps. They returned to their city's symbiotic embrace resolute, ready to fortify justice's growing construct. This was just the beginning of transformation. Their fervent hope echoed across precincts and echo chambers, waiting to touch hearts ready for a world tempered by fairness, proclaimed. And in those moments between doubt and action, when the smallest of victories cast the longest shadows, Jalen, Maria, and Daniel knew they walked a line forged in the world's never-ending twilight march toward equity, undefined by shadows, strengthened by light. The air was thick with anticipation, a collective holding of breath as the clock ticked closer to what could become a watershed moment. In the office of renowned civil rights lawyer Rebecca Crane, the atmosphere bristled with determination and barely restrained tension, a storm silently gathering strength before it could unfurl in thunderous applause or shake everything to the core. Jalen and Maria sat across from Rebecca, their resolve apparent in their postures, backed by histories of service and the burdens of narratives long awaited to surface. The leather of the chairs creaked softly under shifting weight as they adjusted themselves, their minds noting every potential avenue, each anticipated nuance, determining the lay of a strategy as intricate as it was earnest. "We can't afford any half measures here," Rebecca said, her tone embodying the no-nonsense intent she was known for, a veritable force when it came to legal arenas where battles for equality waged deepest. Her office stood as testimony to countless victories, landmark cases that resonated far beyond courtrooms and statutes. Jalen nodded, feeling the charge of their purpose grounded further by her expertise. "This is about making it undeniable. The system protects its own, but it can't ignore the truth when public scrutiny aligns with legal resolve." He laid out the dossier, the piles of evidence growing more tangible each day since its mysterious appearance. Maria added more contextual understanding through testimony, their synced narratives keyed toward a sound that beckoned less toward division, more toward renewal. Rebecca scanned through the material, a frown deepening as she processed the profound implications nestled within those pages. The scope is stunning. This isn't just a matter of holding a few bad actors accountable. This suggests a deeply ingrained culture. "Exactly," Maria replied. "It's about reshaping the cultural landscape of our police force, aligning their actions with true community service. We need solid repercussions with robust—" "Once we go public," Rebecca explained, leaning forward, her demeanor nothing short of dynamic fervor, "we generate not just public interest, but demand systemic response. However, we need timing. Let it coincide with a manageable shift, ensuring that it's less about exposing faults than heralding change." The conversation mapped what was both paper-thin and rock-solid truth, strengthened by their aligned conviction to see justice woven through institutions rather than plucked individually from failings repetitive in history's cycles. "The rally will have orchestrated a baseline of awareness," Jalen added, tapping rhythms of envisioned potential and friction united against discrepancies yet resolved. "It sets the stage for this legal action to take root beyond placating conversation." Rebecca nodded, acknowledging the intricacies involved. "It's a delicate dance to receive it correctly, balancing momentum without victimizing whistleblowers or exacerbating tension. Confusion turned incendiary is a line we vigilantly avoid." Jalen, looking into Rebecca's eyes, saw a momentary softening, a shared understanding flowering there through complexities both encountered. This was a mission defined by prospects, hope grounded in legitimacy verified. Beyond the luxury of speculative intent, there lay incontestable truth. Narratives they engaged transcended uncommon currency being spent, promised through smiling resilience, aligning the universe's arc in justice yet fully intended. The moments they occupied together became pivotal, spiraling into engagements fortified by ethical consistency, buffering passions honed by temperate, judicious thought. For Jalen and Maria, the hope that bridled between breaths was tinged with personal stakes extending behind protocol and badge. Beyond spoken promises echoed through an edifice of righteous endeavors. They walked a hedge, meeting political landscapes heroic in intention. As they prepared to leave, nocturnal shades began slipping into the city, heralding yet another chance to breathe hope into its restless songatonal fabric woven between buildings and wanting resolutions still beyond dreams actively pursued. "Stay vigilant," Rebecca reminded them, rising as they reached the door to leave. "We've ignited interest, but maintaining focus remains critical. If you ever feel fatigued or bewildered, remember, change always requires persistent voices, unyielding belief, and undeniable action." Her words lingered as they returned to daylight, fading into twilight, a transitional state opposed by arms outstretched against sky movement formed longitudinal purpose under Kantian negotiations forcing breaths calculated. Each step they took brought human achievement closer empowered along sidewalks holding precedent realities yet unfairly made. They clung briefly to earnest intent while stepping forth resolute, anchored, defiant, awaiting completion's poetic insistence set upon justice's horizon. The world, alive with fervent calls and cause settlement, lay awake. Before its lavender possibilities, a tapestry of blossoming equity poised, through landscapes veiled and replayed, challenge shaping every fold, every change unmade yet awaiting completed and openly unveiled. The room was hushed, the anticipation palpable as Jalen sat under the glowing fluorescence of the city council meeting room. It felt vast, imposing, yet intimate, as though each shadow cast was imbued with the weight of decisions from countless predecessors. Between wood-paneled walls and rows of occupied seats, history waited to witness testimony that transcended personal narratives into communal drive. This was beyond a city gathering. It was a crucible for truth, a defining moment in Jalen's life. The audience bore a vivid cross-section of community members, city leaders, fellow officers, and activists, their faces a canvas of expectation and resolve. Among them, his allies Maria, Daniel, Gina, each with expressions of steely support, emblematic of the movement they'd painstakingly constructed. Jalen's heart thrummed in his chest, a pulse of anticipation beating in time with the murmur of the assembled crowd. The microphone in front of him was a specter of acknowledgement, a promise that his words would lilt from his own accountability into broader societal change. He inhaled deeply, filling his lungs with air weighted with history and hope. Mayor Edelman, seated at the council's helm, signaled the meeting's commencement. His gaze was steady, yet within it sifted the innumerable balancing acts of leadership stretched between accountability and advocacy. Jalen stood, sensing the gaze of the assembly settle upon him, their attention a tangible stitch, drawing together reason and anticipated revolution. He began, his voice steady despite the enormity of what lay ahead. "For years we've grappled with a silent epidemic," Jalen started, his words resonating through the room, unyielding and unadorned. "Racial injustice within our precinct is not a new issue, but it is one that demands new solutions. Solutions that come from honest confrontation and transparency, starting here and now." He looked up from his prepared notes, seeking the unvarnished truth, gathering momentum behind his gaze. "I stand before you today, not merely as an officer, but as a member of this community, committed to ensuring justice illuminates every corner of our institution." With each sentence, Jalen's conviction translated anger and injustice into tangible experiences. Snippets of stories long said only in private, now given voice in public discourse. The document, the dossier of injustices, sat on the table, a testament of unspoken grievances now exposed. There was a rustle as pages turned, echoes of uncomfortable truths coming alive, a chorus of paper and murmur underpinning Jalen's spoken resolve. This dossier outlines more than isolated incidents. It speaks to a culture that tolerates systemic discrimination. It's time we say, enough. The light fixtures above seemed to hold their breath, along with spectators, momentarily suspended between illuminations, weight and darkness held at bay. A chiaroscuro capturing the essence of the proceedings. Coretta, an activist seated in the front row, nodded, her presence a scaffold against which community pain and power found scaffolding stability. Her involvement provided a reminder that this testimony was not solely for institutional correction, but for mending community trust and perspectives. Together we must dismantle practices that undermine the very foundation of our justice system, Jalen implored, letting his eyes trace the faces within the room, a manifold reflection of those he sought to protect and those who had unknowingly sheltered injustice. We need policies that ensure accountability and oversight that actively engages with citizens, opening pathways for inclusive dialogue. Expressions in the crowd shifted from skepticism to grudging respect. The power of testimony, no longer just facts and figures, but pervasive humanity seeking redress. The systemic rot had no refuge left in shadow. Light had stormed inside, catalyzing hope impeded by now revealed truths. His closing remarks stemmed from years of silence, imbued with newfound agency. The road ahead demands we align consciousness with action, not hasty, unchecked promises, but deliberate steps toward restructuring a culture of integrity, equity, and transparency. Silence enveloped the chamber as Jalen resumed his seat, the echoes of his words reverberating with cumulative possibility. The council meeting continued, yet his testimony lingered living and potent among vividly lit moments of endorsement and rebuttal, personal stakes rendered into collective foresight. Faces across the council bore marks of contemplation, some masked in politics, others laced with genuine intent to enact change. But regardless of division, the groundwork had been laid for redefining the precinct's legacy, not as an isolated narrative, but as a larger story writ boldly into the annals of societal rebirth. For Rebecca, Gina, and Maria, echoes continued their warm insistence as a city bent toward wholeness, defining its measure by courage revealed and shared. As Jalen met his friend's gazes again, he saw there an unbroken promise wrapped into courageous breaths. Companions determined to see justice manifest through every nexus of speech and consequence. Thus evolved days where truth engaged with powerless domination, more reconciliation. Through this testimony's honest stretch, the world witnessed not just grievances examined, but futures reconciled under the nurturing light of shared transformation embraced. As the city reverberated with the echoes of Jalen's testimony, a counterpoint was assembling its narrative. In a nondescript office shielded from the public gaze, members of the police union gathered, their purpose clear, a defense of tradition against what they perceived as a burgeoning threat to their autonomy. The room was alive with tension, a pressure cooker of mixed emotions, where loyalty to the badge clashed against the tides of required change. The union's leadership, a collection of seasoned officers, each hardened by decades of policing, sat at the table's apex, their expressions a mixture of resolve and apprehension. At the head, Officer Glenn Thompson, union president, exuded a commanding presence. His reputation wasn't simply built on years of service, but on a kind of paternal authority that demanded both respect and allegiance. He leaned forward, hands clasped on the table, voice calm and measured, but infused with the latent force of rhetorical purpose. "We've seen what's unfolding outside. It's undeniable," Thompson began, his words woven from a blend of strategic forethought and defensiveness. "But we cannot let this narrative mischaracterize the fundamental truth of our work, our commitment to protecting and serving without fear or favor." Around him, officers nodded, though their agreement bore seams of uncertainty. The room's atmosphere told of a a chasm between tradition steeled by familiar procedures and a progressive call for restructuring from within. Long-standing beliefs about policing clashed with evolving perceptions, a landscape suddenly unsteady beneath their collective feet. "We are not the enemy," Thompson continued, raising his voice marginally. drawing focus into his covetous circle of authority. The city council, the media, they aim to distort, to undermine all we've built. But remember, change cannot come at the cost of our integrity. Whispers permeated the room, exchanges fueled by apprehension and fierce defense of reputation, shields not only physical but woven from layers of trusted narratives, decades in the making. Those assembled could feel the shift beneath Thompson's veneer, sensing the underlying realization that the world was altering rapidly, and with it, permissible conduct. Officer Linda Shaw spoke then, her voice nuanced with seasoned wisdom, intertwined with veiled distress. "Times are changing fast," she admitted, a wistful edge tinging her words. "We must adapt, ensure our practices reflect values befitting the communities we serve, without surrendering all we've achieved." It was an unexpected concession from within their circle, a polite nod toward progress, threading whispers between echoes of tradition. It marked a moment of self-reflection within the insulated air of the Union's committed stronghold. Thompson waved away a surge of discordant remarks, recognizing Shaw's sentiment as indicative of broader pressures both within and beyond the precinct. Awareness settled across the room like a tangible fabric, some able to thread wholeness from its composition, others preferring familiar narratives unyielding to critique. "If we're to engage constructively," Thompson conceded after consideration, "we must enter dialogue not merely as guardians but stewards, offering oversight where needed while maintaining our standards." A murmur of agreement, though reluctant, rippled through the assembly. The acknowledgement that change was not merely an external force to deny, but an internal reflection to embrace, bred in shared experience. Their stalwarts, poised between necessary transformation and reticent acceptance, could no longer ignore the reality that their integrity must align with transparent new systems, a negotiation they needed to own as much as concede. Thompson concluded, focusing his resolve into actionable steps. "We'll actively participate in these reform discussions, ensuring our voices are neither muted nor adversarial, but aligned with an agenda both protective and progressive." The meeting adjourned into introspection, subtle threads woven with brevity and indicative of efforts perhaps more aligned with the reality they defended. As officers filtered out, the legacy of their discussion echoed alongside citywide transformations unfolding. From ground truth to burgeoning accountability, their walkway of understanding extended ever so slightly, daring to breach seemingly impervious boundaries between renewed promise and secure tradition, grafting learning curves and values debatable margins. Both jagged journeys of unionized power and emergent reform underscored a dance of equity on barren stages met and mastered. The Union's resolve not to dismiss but retie structures toward a tomorrow contemplating axes, simplified under illuminating dialogue, retained. For Jalen, bearing witness met with thorough supplication, powered multitudes across united walls. Justice's beam was graphed anew, declaring robust responses against unilateral action. Shields shared by resolve determined to see it fulfill, unfragmented on her awaiting transcendent horizon. The aftermath of the council meeting and the Union's response ricocheted across media networks, transforming it into a sensation that seized public attention like a storm front on the horizon. What had begun in anonymity now moved across screens nationwide, a vibrant dialogue unfolding in real time. Jalen watched, a reluctant actor in this drama, as his story became woven into the broader narrative of accountability and structural reform. News vans lined the city streets, their equipment like eyes listening and capturing, reporting to their stations the pulse of a citizen movement that spoke not with fists, but with words, holding the promise of change. Editorials emerged, both supportive and critical, each staking claims on the precipice of transformation that the city somehow embodied. The media spotlight bore down with an intensity that bordered on surreal. Jalen and Maria found themselves navigating an unfamiliar world of press conferences and interviews, their daily routines interrupted by the weight of newfound influence and responsibility. Everywhere cameras flashed, microphones beckoned, questions hurled with the ferocity of rhetoric unfurling, digesting, analyzing, narrating. On the set of a popular evening news program, Host Jonathan Blake adjusted his tie, nodded at Jalen and Maria as the cameras rolled to life, capturing not just their faces, but the essence of a movement crystallized from empathy and exposure. Tonight, Blake began, his voice resonating through the studio. We have with us the figures at the heart of what some are calling a modern movement for policing reform. Officer Jalen Mills and Detective Maria Santiago. Join us. Jalen, poised yet unaccustomed to such spotlights, felt Maria's reassuring presence beside him, drawing strength from her practiced poise. Her steadfast support held a quiet comfort, a familiar anchor amidst the unexpected tumult. Officer Mills, Blake addressed directly, his eyes intent behind learned neutrality. How do you respond to the union's concerns about preserving tradition amidst calls for drastic change? Jalen took a moment, ensuring his words would carry more than just his personal sentiment, but reflect the hopes of an entire community bound to his narrative. Tradition is valuable, but it must evolve, he began, his tone measured yet resonant. We need to preserve what keeps our communities safe while restructuring systems that isolate instead of unite. Maria chimed in, her voice carrying the wisdom of experience lit with hope. This is about building bridges, SECWA officers and citizens, between past practices and future reforms. We seek a balance that honors the service tradition without blinding us to persistent injustices. The interview played out over framed exchanges, a synthesis of thought, leaving audiences both watching and debating with a fervor reminiscent of another age, seeking its own equitable divides. Your reaction was immediate, virtual spaces erupting with commentary ranging from fiery opposition to earnest support. Social media platforms buzzed, hashtags capturing the zeitgeist. Bridge reform, serve and correct. Justice awaits. It was an unending dance of perceptions, challenged and reaffirmed, a public catharsis driven not by spectacle alone, but by an undeniable quest for justice. Beyond the screens, the city streets bore testament to the narrative unraveling within media's grasp. Conversations flourished in cafes, schools, and homes, a tapestry of discussion woven from voices merged into an impromptu orchestra, peering curiously forward. In quieter moments, between interviews, Jalen found himself reflecting on the unexpected journey sparked not merely by a confrontation on a street corner, but by a profound, collective demand for truth and reconciliation. One evening, as he stood on his apartment balcony, looking out over the city's skyline glowing in nighttime's silhouette, Maria joined him, both resting in shared contemplation of a new kind of horizon stretched before them. The media can be daunting, Maria admitted, breaking the peaceful silence, but it's remarkable how people still care enough to listen. That's powerful. Jalen nodded, acknowledging her sentiment. This isn't the end, Maria. It's the beginning of a story we write with everyone wanting better paths paved with integrity. The sensation of being part of something bigger, yet profoundly personal, engulfed them. They were not alone in this endeavor. Their stories resonated beyond the precinct, beyond the hue of their city under burgeoning transformation. They stood not in isolation, but in solidarity with voices of generations past and those yet to come. As they returned inside, the city carried on its vibrant hum, a background chorus underscoring the chapters yet to be crafted. For no longer was this solely their story, but an evolving movement, steady under the illumination of media's gaze, a reminder that justice, prompt and fair, awaited on its trajectory toward ultimately making the foundations of society richer with transparency, bathed in inclusivity, reaching limitless endpoints now known and fully engraved. The energy from the interviews reverberated through the following weeks, seemingly inexhaustible, and woven into the very fabric of the city. On the streets, in conversations and debates, a movement was crystallizing into something tangible. The rally had been the ignition, Jalen's testimony the fuel, and now the flame spread steadily, seeking to illuminate every shadowed corner of policy and practice. Protesters organized in the heart of the city, gathering momentum like a wave rolling steadily toward an inevitable shore. Placards bearing messages of hope and demands for change mixed in a kaleidoscope of color and conviction. From signs proclaiming "Equity Now" to "Listen to Our Voices," every slogan was a testament to the diverse coalition calling for comprehensive reform. For Jalen, these gatherings were a visceral realization, his voice intertwined with countless others, a symphony of unity that transcended individual experience. He and Maria walked among the crowd, absorbing the charged atmosphere, the range of people present underscoring the universal appeal of their struggles and victories. Among the mass of humanity, familiar faces appeared: activists, community leaders, everyday citizens determined to add their voices to this defining narrative. Gina Harmon, the steadfast ally instrumental in organizing these rallies, stood atop a makeshift stage, addressing the gathered throng with the practiced poise and fiery determination of a leader whose patience had blossomed into action. "We're here because we demand more," Gina proclaimed, her words amplified by the microphone, her presence larger than life. The crowd roared in agreement, the sound rolling upward like a storm cresting, a revitalized call for justice to be recognized in kind by those in power. A sudden hush fell over the assembly as Gina gestured for attention, her voice lowering slightly to carry the intimacy of the message. Change starts here, not just on these streets, but in every heart and mind that dares to envision a new path. Today, we continue the work our ancestors began, and we carry that torch forward. Jalen watched, an unvoiced gratitude swelling within him. These were the moments when he felt the entirety of their effort measured not by his own steps, but by those standing alongside him, affirming the fellowship that had sprung from a single spark. Marching forward, the protesters thrummed with deliberate synergy, their chants rising into the air, a resounding chorus that sifted through the city's reverberating spirit. Police presence was visible, their roles redefined not as adversaries, but as protectors of peaceful demonstration. Officers like Maria guided their interactions, guided as much by duty as by partnership with the communities they served. Media crews hovered nearby, capturing the living pulse of potential splintered into multitude of pathways, converged, a convergence poised on the cusp of transformation. Their cameras swung over the crowd, capturing moments of humanity and determination that would reach far-off living rooms, invoking reflection and, ideally, yet more commitment to action. As the march wound its way through the city streets, Jalen found himself at the heart of a tide that simultaneously buoyed him and carried him onward. Rebellion, framed now as harmony, voices gathered to ensure they didn't echo into silence, but constructed a new dialogue that swayed institutions to hear and reform. At one point, as they reached a symbolic historical landmark, an aged courthouse, those walls having borne witness to so many tales of justice pursued, sometimes delayed, an unexpected unity arrived. Among their number, fragments of the police union made their stand. Officers stood with them, slowly at first, apprehensive but resolute, a quiet miracle acknowledged with emboldened cheers. This is where we start anew, Jalen thought, feeling the promise of possibility anchored not solely in the crowd's amplification, but in every silent, committed glance exchanged. He saw in those eyes, held steady and unwavering, the promise of tomorrow, luminous in the acknowledgement of today's stepping-stone ambition. That evening, as dusk bled into night, the rally suffused its presence through the communal desire stretching into infinite understanding, a longing for reform crossing intangible societal borders. They began as singular voices, encountered now as one sound, propelled by a shared dream, crafted not just searing potential, but a kinetic force to follow. As a new manifestation of community and police intention bound to purpose took root, they knew the journey laid before them would require nurturing and steadfast steps. Jalen, Maria, and their allies stood at the forefront, their silhouettes a testament to radiant change, a narrative embracing every voice yet heard, carrying forth across time's unending pages. In breath, they told stories born from urgency but delivered with newly learned patience, promises inscribed at history's doorstep, wide open to receive aspirational hands reaching forward into the horizon's knowing embrace. As dusk settled over the city, casting elongated shadows through the labyrinth of streets, the energy of change remained palpable, a living force that seemed to hum in the very air. Among the ripples of transformation, a steady tension brewed beneath the surface, a reminder that every movement faced resistance from those embedded in the status quo. Inside a dimly lit bar on the edge of the precinct, Officer Daniels and Officer Carter nursed their drinks, their minds heavy with the day's unfolding drama. The crowd's chants still resonated in their ears, a persistent echo of a world that demanded more than they were initially willing to concede. This day had shaken them, confronting them with the realism that their roles were evolving within an institution they once viewed as unyielding. "I didn't sign up for this," Daniels muttered, setting his drink down with a quiet clatter, the sound barely audible over the low hum of conversation around them. His expression was pensive, lined with the fatigue born of grappling with uncertainty in a system in flux. Carter nodded slowly, his demeanor equally introspective, the bravado he'd once flaunted now tempered by an awareness sown from recent events. "None of us did," he replied, more to himself than to his partner. "But maybe it's time. Maybe things have to change." Daniels glanced at him sharply, the words hanging between them like a fragile truce, balanced on the edge of incredulity and acceptance. "You really think so?" Carter shrugged, a small, almost imperceptible gesture that belied the thoughts churning beneath his calm exterior. "He can't ignore what's happening out there. People are asking questions. Maybe it's the answers that need to change, not just the questions." Their conversation faltered into silence, both men lost in contemplation, grappling with complexities that had, until now, been conveniently ignored. The systemic inertia they were witness to, a product of years ingrained into the essence of policing, felt about to tip, teetering into something undefined yet hopeful. Nearby, a group of younger officers, fresh faces still holding the shine of idealism, sat clustered around a table, discussing the day with a mixture of excitement and skepticism. Their voices carried across the room, a soft undercurrent threading through the quiet atmosphere. "Can you believe what Mills and Santiago are doing?" one of them remarked, his words buoyant with admiration and a hint of uncertainty. "They're really stirring things up out there." "Yeah," another nodded, jabbing at his phone screen with quick flicks, navigating through the latest updates on social media. "People are saying it's time for change. Like real change." Carter listened intently, digesting the resonance of these younger voices, aware that their presence within the force was both invigorating and challenging. A new tide was rising, and it carried with it a momentum that felt like it could sweep away the old, the entrenched. Nearby, Daniels tapped his glass thoughtfully, understanding dawning though resistant in acknowledgement. "Then maybe there's something to this after all," he murmured, untying knots of reluctance, reality broadening before inked eyes finally opened. It was in these unforeseen conversations, couched in the mundane, that the first cracks appeared in the otherwise steadfast barricade of resistance. The tide was turning, ever so subtly, as they began to realize that perhaps they, too, had roles to play in this new narrative. While outside the city unfolded into night, a tapestry of lights and whispers of lives intertwined, Jalen and Maria, oblivious to the seeds of change scattered within their precinct, finally allowed themselves a moment of respite. They stood vigil under the canvas of stars, their hearts full of the work yet unfinished, their minds racing with possibilities before them. Energized by the day's demonstrations, their resolve blended with sweet fatigue, imbued with hope steeped in enduring vigil. For though the movement had gathered remarkable strength, they knew it remained fragile. Each step forward painstakingly planned, appealed for beyond singular endeavor. The city rested, though its dreams remained wide awake, a vassal of aspirations rendered palpable, echoing through the urban landscape. In quiet conversations still unfolding, hidden truths and collaborative discernment wove potential authored by those both enacting and observing. Change was birthing across agents' eyes willing to see, companions drawn to sunsets of understanding for which they collectively reached. For Jalen and Maria, the horizon beckoned with ageless promise, one step closer, guiding hands intertwined, defiant, greeted uncertainty, belied, in familiar warmth, breaking dawn, and here stood a renewed promise, conditional, yet tantalizingly reachable. Through dawn's certain rise, glimpsing futures reconciled within the open pages of their narrative, beautifully inscribed. The air was electric with anticipation as the city braced itself for the imminent verdict, a communal pause that resonated on the edge of expectation and apprehension. It was a day wrought with potential, where the outcome in one courthouse seemed to reverberate far beyond its walls, to the rooftops and alleyways, the schools and corner shops of the entire city. A decision awaited that could fundamentally alter the entrenched dynamics of justice, setting a precedent or reinforcing a fractured status quo. Jalen and Maria stood with Daniel on the courthouse steps, poised to hear the outcome that was more than just an item on a docket. It was a landmark moment, brewing from the amalgamation of every rally, every voice raised in protest, every demand for equity echoing through the city's veins. As people gathered outside the courthouse, they filled the space with a cacophony of emotions and whispered hopes. Among them were journalists with cameras poised, activists clad in T-shirts emblazoned with slogans, and citizens drawn together in shared solidarity. The presence of the gathering was a testament to their collective resolve. Daniel, ever the forthright champion of justice, gazed outward, his demeanor a blend of calculated hopefulness and steely determination. "This can be the change we fought for," he said, speaking to the assembled hopefuls, his hands a testament to gestures of engagement and rallying strength. The courthouse doors swung open, and the crowd held its breath as lawyers, officers, and citizens filed into the marble hallways. The court convened, and within its grand yet imposing chamber, the air heavy with the scent of freshly polished wood, the hierarchy of justice prepared itself to declare its ruling over the cases put forward. The clerk called the court to order, and discussions hushed to silence as the presiding judge took her place, her robe a soft contrast to the solemnity of the work ahead. She surveyed the courtroom, a sea of hopeful faces, doubt mingling with expectation, the weight of which she felt in every decision rendered. As she began to read the judgments, time momentarily seemed suspended. Her voice was clear, measured, as she unpacked the findings, detail by detail, statement by statement. With each word, the atmosphere became charged, absorbing collective intent in shared pursuit of resolution. Reporters sat poised, pencils racing across notepads, fingers hovering over keys ready to unleash the decisive headline that would encapsulate this moment, a moment on which change rested, uncertain yet resolute, teetering between triumph and endurance. Jalen listened intently, feeling the vibrations of consequence ripple through him with every syllable. "The cases of misconduct have been thoroughly reviewed," the judge declared, the courtroom leaning in unconsciously, every person present now part of the unfolding history. "The court finds systemic negligence in oversight and accountability within the policing structures." Faint murmurs of approval and acknowledgement swept through the room, but a tightened focus drew attention back to her next words. As a result, immediate reforms are mandated, including independent oversight committees, mandatory bias and sensitivity training, and enhanced community engagement practices. Outside, the reaction was immediate and powerful, a release of emotion bound by hope, giving way to cheers and affirmations. The steps thrummed with elation, high fives shared among new allies. Tears of relief painted on the faces of those who had carried the burden of advocacy tirelessly to this point. Jalen felt a rush of gratitude and contemplation, emotions colliding within him as the results of their labor, their resolute stand, settled around him like an embrace, a moment of illumination, a firm handshake across the abyss of disparate ideals. Beside him, Maria whispered, "We did it, Jalen. This is just the beginning, but it's happening. Change is happening. Daniel, expression softened with the realization of the ruling's impact, reflected on the journey that had led him here, on the shoulders of giants past and the strength of community solidarity forged across barriers. "This is history," he said, the emotion in his voice an acknowledgement of the victory present and the battles yet to be fought. As the courthouse steps teemed with jubilation, the media captured every moment of celebration and resolve. The headlines spoke not only of a verdict, but of momentum unyielding, a movement that could not be hushed. The story, stretching into lessons, portrayed bold and just. For many, it marked the advance of justice beneath the spirit of collective endeavor, birthing substance where mere shadows reached before. It was a testament to the power of voices, united and fearless, ready to embark on continued journey, ensuring the flames of equity were sustained and celebrated as tradition. Through it all, as they came together beneath a sky vast and promising, raised hands celebrated not only today, but all tomorrows, it promised. In firm alignment with dreams daring to be realized, each standing together on the courthouse steps, as keepers of truths untold, eternally poised to uplift justice loudly declared. As the city basked in the aftermath of a landmark verdict, hearts swelled not just with pride but with a renewed sense of purpose. Yet, amidst the jubilation, essential conversations continued, reflecting on what had been accomplished and the work still to be done. This was not just a victory claimed, it was a call to action, beckoning the community to maintain momentum. In a small community center nestled in the heart of the city, the echoes of earlier celebrations gave way to quieter, more reflective gatherings. Here, activists, community leaders, and citizens came together to discuss the next steps, how to translate this legal victory into sustained, meaningful change that could root itself in everyday life. Gina stood at the front of the room, her presence magnetic, as she corralled thoughts into coherent plans. "This isn't the end," she declared, her voice decisive, almost symphonic in its resonance against the bare walls. "This is our blueprint, a chance to think bigger and deeper about what we want our communities to become." Maria, seated at one of the circular tables, leaned in, her interest piqued by the discussions unfolding around her. The conversations were vibrant, passionate, each table a microcosm of the larger movement, filled with voices plotting pathways to peace and equitability. Jalen, too, found himself engaged in a dialogue, surrounded by residents eager to share their perspectives. For them, this was a rare opportunity to connect directly with changemakers, to voice concerns and contribute ideas outside the formal mechanics of hearings and bureaucracies. "We've seen the potential," said an older gentleman at Jalen's table, his eyes carrying the wisdom of years lived through fights for equity. "But seeing potential and fulfilling it are different beasts altogether. How do we ensure the reforms last?" Jalen nodded, the challenge voluminously clear yet invigorating. "We make it impossible to ignore," he said. "We involve everyone, every age, every race, every background, to keep this energy alive. We need constant dialogue, active participation, and relentless oversight." Nearby, a teacher nodded in agreement, her voice soft yet powerful. "Education is key, not just in schools, but across all community touchpoints. People need to know their rights, how to engage, and most importantly, how to hold the system accountable." There was a hum of assent that rippled through the room, the sense of unity palpable, solidifying bonds as plans to amplify this confluence of advocacy took shape. Initiatives were proposed: community forums, educational workshops, regular accountability meetings, all threads designed to weave durability into the reforms. As the evening wore on and discussions delved deeper, it became clear that the fight was not merely for systemic reform, but for cultural evolution, a reclaiming of balance and justice through collaborative strength. Gina brought the meeting to a close, her closing remarks a rallying cry that resonated with the room, invigorated, yet aware of the vigilance required. "This story doesn't end here," she said, a fire lighting her eyes akin to dawn. "Our responsibility extends to future generations. We're sowing seeds for trees under which we may never sit, and that's the legacy we leave." As people began to disperse, the mood was buoyant, determined. each person carrying within a flame newly fueled by shared dreams and unified purpose. There was no parting glasses half full. The satisfaction came in contribution and the promise of what their efforts heralded. Jalen, stepping out into the night with Maria by his side, felt the weight of the moment balanced by hope, held against the constellations stretching across the city sky. "We've come far," he observed quietly, a slight smile playing across his face. "Far, but not far enough," Maria replied, though her words were laced with optimism. "But it feels sustainable now, rooted in real, tangible possibility." The cool evening air carried whispers of endeavor borne across city landscapes, notes sung through valleyways echoing resolve, intrinsically harmonized by shared humanity, eager to foster lasting change. Their steps, measured against history's lines of once ambiguous delineations, formed footfalls that now pulsated with a chorus of community hymns inscribing footprints anew. This wasn't just about crossing thresholds, as much as it was about preparing to continually vault over any fence that dared to obstruct the vision so painstakingly crafted. And as Jalen and Maria walked, they understood that change sang not just in victories claimed, but in the continuous work, perpetually unfinished, always beckoning the dreamers, the navigators, the architects of equity to never rest, to always move forward, guided by lights kindled and kept alight by hearts yearning for justice, His never-ending grace. As the city gradually settled into the quiet rhythms of the night, the echoes of the day's triumph remained, whispering through the streets like a lullaby of hope. Jalen stood on his apartment balcony, overlooking the sleeping city, a sprawling testament to the resilience and potential of its people. The skyline was a constellation of lights, each one a beacon that told of stories yet unfolding, of victories not yet claimed but promised. The air was crisp, carrying with it the coolness of night and the intoxicating scent of possibility. The movement, started by a single encounter on a city street, had grown into something monumental, something that transcended individual stories to become a collective endeavor toward justice. He felt the weight of it all, a burden but also a blessing, the opportunity to be part of something greater than himself. Inside, his phone buzzed with notifications. Messages of congratulations, invitations to speak, and inquiries from across the nation. Support poured in from unexpected places, creating a network of focused energy and goodwill. Each vibration was a reminder that the world was watching, and more importantly, willing to act. Maria joined him, her presence a familiar comfort as they both surveyed the cityscape bathed in moonlight. She leaned against the railing, her gaze drawn to the horizon where the sky met the earth in perfect harmony. The line barely discernible, yet profoundly significant. "You ever imagine we'd get here?" she asked softly, her voice carrying the vestiges of disbelief mingled with an assured satisfaction. "From that first day, it feels like a lifetime ago." Jalen smiled, a genuine warmth spreading across his face. "I knew we had a chance, but the reality of it takes my breath away. It's incredible how far we've come and how much further we can still go." They stood in companionable silence, the gravity of their journey evident in each shared look, every quiet breath. They had transformed obstacles into pathways, barriers into bridges, a testament to their courage, unity, and unwavering commitment to justice. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" Maria reflected, her words a soft echo that melded into the night, a shared acknowledgement of the road ahead, fraught with challenge but lined with opportunity. "Yeah," Jalen replied, his voice gentle but filled with determination. "But it's a beginning we've earned. A chance to reshape the narrative and keep pushing forward. We've lit the torch, and now we have to keep it burning." The city below seemed to murmur in agreement, the very stones of the streets resonating with the promise held in the hearts of its people, a promise to maintain momentum, to strive for equity, to ground dreams in action. Together, they stood united against the backdrop of a city poised on the cusp of change, a change they had ignited through sheer will and the cumulative power of countless voices rising into a chorus that knew no silence. The stars above shone brighter than they had in a long time, a cosmic reassurance that the universe occasionally aligns with humanity's best intentions, urging them forward in their quest for truth and fairness. As they turned to go inside, their hearts light yet full of resolve, the city continued its nocturnal vigil, bearing witness to a movement that would never rest, anchored in the eternal endeavor of building a world that, while imperfect, strives ceaselessly for justice and equality. Their journey was not just a momentary triumph, but a lasting declaration, a new chapter written in the annals of history, one where courage and unity wove through every line, whispering truths that promised to endure. And as the night deepened, the whisper of change lingered, a quiet pledge, a shared dream, held tenderly against the dawn of a new day where hope was not just an idea, but a force realized, waiting patiently on justice's horizon, waiting patiently on justice's horizon.